today.
Thank you, Father Lopez. The title of His Eminence Cardinal Donald Wuerl's talk this morning is Religious Liberty and the Church's Voice in Transforming Our Culture, an American Perspective. I've been asked to reflect on the challenges to religious liberty today from an American perspective. Then we will touch on the legacy of Dignitatis humanae in the struggle to defend religious liberty, in the role of the Church as she works to carry out her mission to preach the gospel and transform culture, especially in light of the call of our Holy Father, Pope Benedict, for a new evangelization to provide a light to the world and renew society. We in America have long prided ourselves on this being the land of the free. And while there has always been some level of anti-Catholic bigotry and discrimination in society, religious freedom was something that we took for granted under our constitutional system. But now we are in the midst of a sea change. Increasingly, the dominant culture, the education, information, and entertainment industries, and now the government, seeks to bleach out recognition and appreciation of God and the importance of religious faith. Fundamental religious liberties and the right of conscience are increasingly being threatened and violated, hindering our efforts to live our faith and share it with others. But it is not only here that religious liberty is under assault. At the recent Synod on the New Evangelization, which met in Rome in October, many Synod fathers noted the worldwide increase in religious persecution and marginalization, Propositions 13, 15, and 16. And Pope Benedict has spoken on these alarming developments often. To fully understand the current challenges we face here in the United States, it is helpful to place them within a historical context. Thus, as a preface to my observations, I want to begin with the story of an event I was privileged to participate in almost 4 years ago in Southern Maryland. With pageantry and prayerful ceremony, hundreds of people gathered in May 2009 at the reconstructed 1667 brick chapel in historic St. Mary's City, Southern Maryland, for an unusual event, an occasion that has increasing significance for us today. The sheriff of St. Mary's County, using an exact reproduction of what is believed to be the very key that his predecessor used to seal the chapel in 1704, unlocked its tall, sturdy wooden doors. Together with the priest representing the Jesuits in Maryland, I had the privilege of pushing open the doors. The unlocking, while a symbolic or ceremonial event, carried with it great meaning because it is a reminder that we are a free people, and among the rights we celebrate are the freedom of conscience, freedom of worship, freedom of religion. In 1634, when the Ark and the Dove arrived, carrying nearly 150 English settlers to what is now St. Mary's County, those brave women and men established the first settlement to offer and guarantee religious liberty to all of the inhabitants. In effect, they constructed what would become known as the birthplace of religious freedom in America. All of us, as spiritual descendants of those intrepid women and men, can rejoice and take pride in their vision and courage. Unfortunately, in 1704, when those who did not share this foresight and perspective gained political control, the Act of Toleration, as it had become known, was revoked. The royal governor ordered the brick chapel locked and never again used for religious purposes. The celebration of the unlocking of the brick chapel is a reminder of the place of values, moral, ethical, and religious, in the life and in the society of which we are a formative part, the importance of our individual freedom in living and articulating those values, and finally of the fragile nature of freedom of conscience, freedom of religion. The history of St. Mary's Chapel is a reminder of two aspects of the American experience. First is the ubiquitous place of religious conviction in the unfolding and articulation of the American political and social structure. Concomitantly with this awareness is the history of religious bigotry. One does not cancel out the other. But the legitimization of some faith groups, and especially Catholicism in American culture and political circles, has come at a slower pace than the far more generally recognized place of religion itself in the American social, cultural, political, and legal structures. Examples, therefore, of curtailment of specific religious liberties do not of themselves argue against the more general thesis of the importance of religious conviction in the formulation of the mores, public policy, and idea of the common good of our nation. As we reflect on the legacy of the Second Vatican Council's document on religious freedom, Dignitatis Humanae, I would like to look briefly at the role of religious faith in our nation from its very beginning. Religious faith as the conscience of our society, its manifestation in so many institutional ways as a part of the fabric of our country, and then on the challenges to that vision, history, and practice that the new and virulent secularism proposes. All of this, as I said, we will look at in the light of the legacy of Dignitatis Humanae as we face the challenges to religious liberty in a pluralistic society. Here we can see elements in our heritage that support the intuitions of the Second Vatican Council. We also see how the Council's teaching today recalls us to our own legacy and historic political ideal of freedom. Precisely as the hegemony of secularism is being asserted and its voice lifted up as the only legitimate articulation of our public identity, we can see in Dignitatis Humanae a call to our own roots and constitutive values. As you know, there are statues in the Capitol building representative of the history of each state. When I served as an auxiliary bishop in the state of Washington, I was always very proud of the fact that one statue was Mother Joseph, a sister of Charity of Providence, who was considered one of the pioneers in the formation of that state by her work as a religious and the impact of her life on the state. The state of Hawaii is represented by the recently canonized saint of the lepers, Damien de Voister. Representing California in the same expanse of space under the dome of the Capitol is the statue of Junipero Serra. It is hard to imagine another person who has left such an impact on any state in the Union as has this quiet, modest, faith-filled Franciscan, whose footsteps left in their wake what are now communities along most of the coast of California. The church buildings, temples, and synagogues that dot the landscape, and the interstate highway signs that recall the calendar of the saints do more than simply remind us of our faith history. They also proclaim how deeply embedded religious faith is in our culture and in our vision of human dignity, moral imperative, and the purpose of life. In the recently concluded Synod for the New Evangelization for the Transmission of the Christian Faith, one of its concluding propositions noted that religious freedom is a basic human right, Proposition 16. Here the Synod made reference to Dignitatis Humanae, and I quote, "The right to religious freedom has its foundation in the very dignity of the human person, as this dignity is known through the revealed word of God and by reason itself." Dignitatis Humanae 2. With religious faith comes also a way of living, a set of standards for moral and civil behavior, and those expectations of conduct that are threads to this day woven into the fabric of our societal life. You shall not kill is not simply a legal convention of any particular political tendency, but rather a moral imperative rooted in our human nature, proclaimed by our religious heritage and intrinsic to our identity as a people. Disciples of Jesus Christ in particular are charged with a solemn mission in the world. The Catholic faith consists not merely of believing in certain ideas, but is a living faith, one that informs everything the person thinks, does, and says, even when engaged in otherwise secular activities. By virtue of baptism, the Christian is conformed to Christ in the very depths of his being. Our fundamental vocation to love God and one another requires charitable service to others. Freedom to do so is not only fundamental to human dignity, but it is also integral to building up the common good and establishing a just society. In his legendary farewell address as President of the United States, George Washington dwelt on the necessary and vital part that religion must play in the well-being of a nation. Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, our first president declared, religion and morality are indispensable supports. Let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Whatever may be conceded to the influence of refined education of minds of peculiar structure, reason, and experience, both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principles. A most remarkable point about President Washington's statement is precisely the fact that it was utterly unremarkable in his time. Today, I would like to explore with you why that was so, why there were not shock waves of indignation at his emphatic endorsement of religion as a presupposition for the political prosperity of our infant republic, how far some of the opinion makers of today's dominant culture have sidelined the mindset from which his remarks sprung, and how the Second Vatican Council's Declaration on Religious Freedom may help us chart a course into the future. Section 1, the natural law and religious liberty in the American experience. Natural law in the formulation of civil law. The American experience, like virtually all political endeavors in history, assumed the importance and authority of divine law in the fashioning of its civil laws. As George Washington's address suggests, the place of religion in shaping American political and cultural life was presumed from the beginnings of our country. Drawing from contemporary political philosophy, as well as English common law and political theory, the religious undertones of natural law principles were of decisive importance in the formulation of positive civil law in the early American colonies and the new nation. The development of American political thought from the time of the Mayflower Compact and the Maryland Act of Toleration resulted eventually in a composite political philosophy that guided the colonists at the time of the Revolution. It is found in a multiplicity of sources, such as the Bible, sermons, classics in philosophical literature, platform addresses, newspaper discussions, pamphlets, official pronouncements and directives, resolutions of colonial assemblies, and colonial charters and constitutions. Though in varied ways, these sources all recognized that the foundation of all law was the divine law, and identified the natural law written in the heart of every man and woman as the human manifestation of that eternal law. As John Barnard, in his Massachusetts election sermon of 1734, stated simply, "This voice of nature is the voice of God." Increasingly, the natural moral law became the primary lens through which Americans perceived the basis of their legal system. In his classic 1935 work, The Education of the Founding Fathers of the Republic, James Walsh argued convincingly that the system of colonial colleges instilled in the young pre-revolutionary Americans a deep conviction in both divine and natural law. He cites a large number of references in the form of thesis topics chosen at various colleges to make his point. Many other documents could be cited to demonstrate that we Americans have, since our founding, acknowledged the vital role of religious faith in our public life. We are historically very comfortable with the role of a natural moral order, grounded in transcendent norms, that should guide the formulation of civil law. It is only in this context that we can properly evaluate and appreciate the religious liberty that the founders fought so hard to weave into our national fabric and to protect in our Constitution. Religious liberty derived from natural law. Our religious liberties are not granted to us by governments of men or subject to majority rule, but are intrinsic to our human nature. Religious liberty is a natural right, endowed to us by our Creator as a part of our very being, and thus inviolate and inalienable. For its part, the proper role and purpose of government is to protect and foster those natural rights and liberties. This contributes to the deepest good of man because it is this freedom which has historically enabled religious believers to make their particular contribution to the common good. Last year, in a unanimous Supreme Court judgment affirming the importance of religious freedom, the Chief Justice of the United States explained that religious liberty is not just the first freedom for Americans, it is also the first in the history of modern democracy, tracing its origins back to the initial clauses of the Magna Carta of 1215 and beyond. Hosanna Tabor Evangelical Lutheran Church versus EEOC. The intensity of our early founders' demands for religious liberty can only be understood in light of this history. Our founding fathers rightly understood that religious liberty is a direct derivation of the natural law itself. It is a natural right, our patrimony as rational beings and creatures of God, and a primary conclusion of the natural law, and hence must protect it, not treat it as a benefice granted by the government. There is another reason why religious liberty so colored American revolutionary fervor. Given the foundations of American jurisprudence in the divine and natural law, freedom of religion was tantamount to political freedom itself. If religion enjoyed freedom from undue government burdens, it would better be able to serve the important role of discerning and understanding, in the words of the Declaration of Independence, the laws of nature that derive from nature's God. Even the very plurality of religious traditions created an atmosphere in the new republic that promoted fruitful engagement and discussion of the most credible and convincing approach to the natural law as it was inscribed into our nation's legal framework. It is therefore fitting that when the Bill of Rights was ratified, protection of religious freedom had the distinction of being the First Amendment, guaranteeing that Congress shall make no law representing an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. It is that freedom which has historically enabled religious believers to make their particular contribution to the common good, especially in the application of transcendent truths and the natural law to the political and cultural challenges of each age. However, it is crucial to understand that our religious liberties are not created by or dependent upon the First Amendment. Rather, there is a higher law, and the Constitution merely protects those pre-existing inalienable rights which are founded in the dignity of the human person, Dignitatis humanae 2. Thus, the First Amendment should not be read as a limitation upon our religious freedoms in the public sphere. It should not be interpreted as requiring government to restrict or otherwise burden the exercise of our freedoms in seeking to build up the kingdom of God. The next section, entitled Religion as Cultural Conscience, the Church's Interpreter of the Natural Law, we will omit for the sake of time. We will continue with section 3, Challenges to Religious Influence in the Public Square, recasting separation of church and state. Today we face an aggressive and pervasive secularism which seeks to push God and religious belief, practice, and morality out of the public square and into the purely private sphere, if not out of people's lives altogether. We are being told that religion has no place in the public forum. As a nation, we are passing from one cultural structure in which moral and ethical principles rooted in religious faith are seen as normative to a culture that marginalizes religious faith as mere personal preference or opinion. Public ethical decisions, once a multifaceted and pluralistic response to the human condition, are increasingly narrowed into a singular, monolithic, secularist point of view. This societal and cultural transformation, much of which is driven by the entertainment and information industries, is now having a corrosive impact in the political spectrum. The assumption of the secular model of society as the only acceptable way of addressing life colors much of our media presentation and sets the tone for the discussion of most issues of true significance. Precisely because of this, we need to look again at the place of religion and gospel values in our efforts to build a common good. We cannot divide personal morality and ethics from political life, any more than we can separate spiritual values from human values. It is an unnatural and unhealthy condition for the individual and society so to compartmentalize our most firmly held convictions that they are not allowed to affect our public lives. Not only did Thomas Jefferson subscribe to the proposition that all are created equal, but his writings indicate that he extended the logic of that statement. All people are obliged to a code of morality that rests on human nature, that is the foundation of our human dignity and equality. Jefferson recognized no distinction between public and private morality. In a letter to James Madison dated August 28, 1789, he wrote, "I know but one code of morality for all, whether acting singly or collectively." Our Holy Father, Pope Benedict XVI, offers us guidance when we deal with the relationship of faith and public life. In his first letter to the church, God is love, he tells us, the two spheres, church and state, are distinct, yet always interrelated, from section 28. In this, the church seeks no privileges, nor does she seek to intervene in areas unrelated to her mission, but simply to exercise the latter with freedom. Pope Benedict in his address to diplomats, January 10, 2011. The legitimate separation of church and state does not mean that the church is not allowed a voice in the public conversation. The church does not impose her beliefs on anyone, but instead proposes the ways of the kingdom in terms that the world can understand and examine, terms that they may freely accept or reject. The separation of church and state, as it has been long understood in our country, does not mean separation of faith and moral values from the public square and the formulation of public policy. The Pope goes on to tell us that the separation of church and state opens the space necessary for both church and state to influence and form culture. Politics, law, and faith are mingled because believers are also citizens. Both church and state are home for the same people. The church does not pursue her mission or function by becoming involved in civil governance or by taking sides in partisan politics. Rather, the function of faith is one of persuasion. The church teaches and continues to teach, and should be free to do so unencumbered by legal or cultural restrictions on speech. The growing rift between religious worldview and secular humanism. Already 2 decades ago, William Bentley Ball wrote an account of how and why religion slipped from its place from the first of American freedoms. In his book, Mere Creatures of the State, A View from the Courtroom, he highlights the degree to which both the legislative and judicial arenas accommodate challenges to the exercise of freedom of religion, freedom of conscience. These political and legal indicators of the growing disregard for religious liberty and a widening gulf between religion and the public square reflect a broader rift that is opening between a basically religious worldview and secular humanism. In his address to American bishops last year, the Holy Father reflected on this division that is becoming more evident by the day. He stated, "At the heart of every culture, whether perceived or not, is a consensus about the nature of reality and the moral good, and thus about the conditions for human flourishing. In America, that consensus, as enshrined in your nation's founding documents, was grounded in a worldview shaped not only by faith, but a commitment to certain ethical principles deriving from nature and nature's God. Today, that consensus has eroded significantly in the face of powerful new cultural currents, which are not only directly opposed to core moral teachings of the Judeo-Christian tradition, but increasingly hostile to Christianity as such. This gathering storm has been created not by religious influence on our public policy, which has been a part of our American experience from the beginning, but by an increasingly bold, ideologically driven, and progressively intolerant secular humanism that sees religious values as the principal threat to the secular frame of reference for the public forum. This secularism is so generally pervasive that it often succeeds in encouraging a forgetfulness about God, a separation of faith from actual everyday life. Individualism similarly encourages a pick-and-choose approach to the faith, and many people are attached to worldly material things and matters to the exclusion of the transcendent. Because of these social, cultural, and political trends of recent times, we are seeing a marginalizing of the church in her ability to function and live out our gospel mandate to serve others in charity and proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ. Like a tsunami, this increasingly assertive negative secularism has washed across much of our culture and taken with it the previously accepted societal understanding of marriage, family, objective right and wrong, the common good, and the fundamental dignity of the human person and inviolability of human life. It is not difficult to find examples of this marginalization of faith in our national conversation, together with its devastating effects. Mention of God, until recently, was simply taken for granted in our public civic life, and prayer, sufficiently generic, was a routine part of public, government-sponsored programs and activities. Limitations on religious expressions are now common by both judicial fiat and ordinary bureaucratic decree. There are more ominous signs, though, of this bleaching out of religion in the public sphere, reflected in certain threats to our religious freedom. Catholic agencies, employers, and individuals have been subjected to government regulations demanding that they adopt policies and practices that are contrary to faith, conscience, fundamental human dignity, and the common good. The Statement on Religious Liberty, April 12, 2012, published by the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops Ad Hoc Committee for Religious Liberty, include a number of pointed examples, including the Federal Department of Health and Human Services mandate requiring all institutions to provide health insurance that includes morally objectionable products and procedures such as sterilization, contraceptives, and possible abortifacient drugs, or face harsh and punitive fines. Harsh immigration laws that would impede ordinary pastoral care for immigrants and refugees. Attempts by the Connecticut State Legislature to forcibly restructure the internal governance of Catholic parishes, and discrimination against Catholic humanitarian services, such as the USCCB efforts in administering contract services for victims of human trafficking. The most significant challenge to religious freedom is found in the current administration's insistence on its right to define for the Church, for all religious faiths, what constitutes their ministry. You may recall that in an earlier attempt to assert its authority to even define who is a minister for a particular religious community, this present administration went into federal court. Fortunately for us, the assertion by the government of the United States that it could determine who is a proper ministry for a religious community was rejected by the Supreme Court in a 9-0 judgment in Hosanna Tabor Evangelical Lutheran Church versus EEOC. The administration is now back with a like assertion with respect to the HHS mandate. This time it claims the unique authority to establish what constitutes religious ministry. In the definition of religious ministry embedded in the HHS mandate, a religious institution is so narrowly defined as to exclude Catholic hospitals, universities, Catholic charities, and most Catholic social service entities. The requirement of the Gospel of Matthew, placed on the lips of Jesus himself, that we feed the hungry and give drink to the thirsty, is dismissed as irrelevant in the definition of religious ministry, unless, in the case of Catholics, the hungry and the thirsty are exclusively Catholic and served exclusively by Catholics, with the overriding objective of inculcating the Catholic faith. In effect, this is an effort to reduce religious freedom to mere freedom of worship within a house of prayer. In this eclipse of the sense of God in our culture, as now advanced further by our government, entire generations have become disassociated from the support systems that facilitated the transmission of the Catholic faith. 2 generations have experienced a secularization that has alienated them from their own spiritual heritage. For many who initially heard the proclamation of the gospel, the message has lost its appeal. The sense of transcendence has been lost. The vision has faded, and promises seem empty or unconnected to their lives. As is evident, we are not discussing theoretical options in an academic environment. We are talking about the survival of our institutions and their ability to function in this country. As believers called to a new evangelization, we need to chart a course for the future. Fortunately, we have the map, the foundational principles for Christian life in a pluralistic world embedded in the Declaration on Religious Freedom, Dignitatis Humanae, of the Second Vatican Council, the document towards which we now turn as we prepare to navigate ahead in challenging times. Section 4, Dignitatis Humanae and the Way Forward. In light of the recognition of the Second Vatican Council as an instrument for the new evangelization and the growing need to protect the religious liberty of Christians throughout the world, the Synod Fathers proposed a new, renewed commitment to and wider diffusion of the teachings of Dignitatis Humanae, Proposition 16. In reflecting upon the principles established in Dignitatis Humanae, I would like to briefly identify 7 points of reference for our consideration. 2 of these pertain to religious liberty itself, 3 to the government's relationship to religion and liberty, and 2 to the church's immediate response. Religious liberty proceeds from the dignity of the human person. The Declaration on Religious Freedom states that the right to religious freedom has its foundation in the very dignity of the human person, as this dignity is known through the revealed Word of God and by reason itself. Made in the image and likeness of God, every person enjoys, as our own Declaration of Independence affirms, certain inalienable rights. Whatever the shadows in our own Catholic history regarding religious liberty, the teaching of the Church is absolutely clear. This freedom means that all men are to be immune from coercion on the part of individuals or of social groups and of any human power, in such wise that in matters religious, no one is to be forced to act in a manner contrary to his own beliefs, whether privately or publicly, whether alone or in association with others, within due limits. This right of the human person to religious freedom is to be recognized in the constitutional law whereby society is governed. It is the duty of every Catholic, then, to defend our own religious liberty and that of others. Conscience and the religious freedom are not open to negotiation or compromise. The role of government is neither to bestow nor hamper that liberty, but rather to protect it. Our nation was founded on the principle that essential rights of man are not conferred by the government, but given directly by God. The Second Vatican Council taught that the truth cannot impose itself except by virtue of its own truth, as it makes its entrance into the mind at once quietly and with power. The government's role, then, in providing protection against coercion contributes to the deepest good of man. By fostering a safe environment for religious exploration and expression, the government honors, respects the most important purpose of every person's life, his quest for truth and for God. Transcendent moral norms are vital for a healthy society. Hence, government should foster, not simply remain neutral towards religion. Since this personal quest for truth is the highest good of man, it follows that it is also the highest good for society at large. As President Washington stated so forcefully in his farewell address, the importance of transcendent moral norms in the democratic system, together with the free religious and secular associations that help embody those moral beliefs, cannot be overstated. Dignitatis humanae states that the government therefore ought indeed to take account of the religious life of the citizenry and show it favor, since the function of government is to make provision for the common welfare. Ultimately, it is transcendent beliefs of whatever shade that validate the claims of society to bind its citizens to a specific way of living. To put it negatively, without some spiritual reference point that binds all of us, public moral values in a democracy are reduced to personal opinion and a simple majority of voters, a reductivist approach that poses the grave danger that political choices will be motivated solely by personal convenience and gain. Law can thereby become a matter of might. Who has more power rather than right of what we know we ought to do? Transcendent truth is recognized as immutable and independent of the individual. Positions determined by the exercise of pure reason are internally generated, alterable and dependent on the individual. When majority opinion is the only reference point for the validity of the law, rather than transcendent truth, an objective moral order, a member of the minority might properly regard the law as merely someone else's opinion. Our sense of obligation to follow a law is related to our recognition that it has its roots in abiding objective norms, rather than even the will of the majority. What religious faith and conviction bring to the political order is the conscientious requirement that out of all things we can do, we do only what we ought to do. Unwarranted restrictions on religious liberty are unjust laws, and unjust laws are not laws at all. In his famous letter from a Birmingham jail in 1963, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. boldly said, "The goal of America is freedom." As a Christian pastor, he argued that calling Americans to the full measure of that freedom was the specific contribution Christians are obliged to make. He rooted his legal and constitutional arguments about justice in the long Christian tradition. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. To put it in the terms of St. Thomas Aquinas, an unjust law is a human law that is not rooted in eternal law and natural law. Unlike conscientious objection, when relief is sought from a just law for reasons of conscience, no relief is sought from an unjust law. It is not a law at all. The only response is to repeal it. Jesus teaches that while we have a duty to submit to lawful government authority, there is a higher law and greater duty that we owe to God. In living our Catholic faith in public, there are certain obligatory principles that we cannot compromise. Consistent with our obligation to love, the human person is and ought to be the principle, subject, and end of all social institutions. We cannot compromise with evil, but must instead resist it and always seek to do good under the natural law. A citizen is obliged in conscience not to obey the laws of civil authorities when they are contrary to the demands of the moral order. We must obey God rather than men, cited from Acts 5:29 and Evangelium Vitae 71 through 74. The church remains the voice of conscience for our society. Whatever the threats to our liberty, it is imperative that the church continue to serve our culture and our nation as the voice of conscience. Our efforts to pray for our fellow citizens and public leaders, to share the living words of the gospel and their implications today, to speak up on behalf of the truth, and to protect those on the margins of society are never wasted. The Pope offered these words of advice to the bishops last January. For her part, the Church in the United States is called, in season and out of season, to proclaim a gospel which not only proposes unchanging moral truths, but proposes them precisely as the key to human happiness and social prospering. Institutions such as Catholic universities and hospitals, too, must be prepared to manifest courageously their institutional commitment by articulating ever more clearly Catholic moral principles and standing by them. Institutional witness has to have an identity every bit as explicit as personal witness. There is a need for a credible restatement of transcendent moral norms. Differing opinions are not a threat to a healthy human society, nor a threat to the political process based on a desire for a common good. The honest, open presentation of differences in a pluralistic society is the stuff around which dialogue takes place and out of which mutual respect and toleration grows. What is a serious threat to the well-being, the common good of a pluralistic society would be the exclusion from public life, policy, and law of the values held by a significant segment of the society. Finally, the restatement of transcendent moral norms must be accompanied by a renewed commitment on the part of Catholics to live faithfully and joyfully those norms and the faith as a whole in the new evangelization. We are called now to repropose our Catholic faith to provide light and hope to a society greatly in need of both. We need to proclaim the good news in ways that are new in ardor, method, and expression, adapting our approach so as to attract and urge people to find the uncomplicated, genuine, and tangible treasure of friendship with Jesus. In sharing our faith with others, we must be bold, connected to the church, urgent, and joyful. Credibly restating the good news of Jesus Christ and transcendent moral norms in this sense is not only an intellectual challenge, but a moral one. In the words of Venerable Pope Paul VI, modern man listens more willingly to witnesses than to teachers, and if he does listen to teachers, it is because they are witnesses. Dignitatis humanae is a reminder to us that religious freedom is not a freedom to be enjoyed in isolation, but a freedom to be exercised, a challenge to be met, and a gift to be shared with others. In conclusion, we all need to look again at the place of religion and gospel values in our efforts to build a common good. Our objective as Catholics is to work to build up the kingdom of God. But unlike earthly kingdoms, ours will take no one by conquest, no one by coercion. Instead, we pray for others, we converse with them, we befriend them, and we invite them. We share our faith with them, we persuade them. One of the great strengths of our national discourse is a conviction that different opinions are not a threat to a healthy human society. Recent incursions against religious freedom are so jarring precisely because they run counter to the great momentum of our national history. Excluding values that are held by a significant segment of the society from public life, policy, and law is a serious threat to the well-being, the common good of a pluralistic society. As the USCCB states, we Christians object to the notion of a naked public square stripped of religious arguments and beliefs, but neither do we seek a sacred public square, which gives special privileges and benefits to religious citizens. Rather, we seek a civil public square, where all citizens can make their contribution to the common good. Personally, I remain optimistic. I believe that the current effort to bleach out God from our public life will ultimately fail for a number of reasons. God is part of the lives of the overriding majority of people in our nation. This is demonstrated in poll after poll. To pretend otherwise ill-prepares society to deal realistically with the actual human condition. Just as God was with the people who forged this great nation from sea to shining sea, so God continues to be with us. Each of us plays a part in the effort to balance what I suggest what is truly out of kilter. This is done in our personal, serene, but firm affirmation that God is a part of life, public and private. When enough people say what they believe, eventually it will be heard. In their final message at the Synod on the new evangelization, the Synod Fathers were clear and resolute, and I quote, "We are not intimidated by the circumstances of the times in which we live. Our world is full of contradictions and challenges, but it remains God's creation. The world is wounded by evil, but God loves it still. It is his field in which the sowing of the word can be renewed so that it would bear fruit once more. There is no room for pessimism in the minds and hearts of those who know that their Lord has conquered death and that his Spirit works with might in history. We approach this world with humility, but also with determination. This comes from the certainty that the truth triumphs in the end." Earlier I mentioned George Washington. Today, February 22nd, is his actual birthday, even though the nation celebrated it earlier this week. Washington is called the father of our country, and he is widely lauded as a great leader. Why is that? After all, he was not an intellectual giant. He was not a great strategist as general during the Revolution. He lost most of his battles. And his presidency did not have any remarkable policy achievements. Yet, he is considered to be great because of the firmness of his character, because of his steadfast determination and perseverance in the cause of liberty in the face of many challenges, which helped sustain his troops, encourage delegates to the Constitutional Convention, and enable the new republic to survive. If we who draw upon the great American tradition of religious liberty in a pluralistic society continue to speak up as the voice of conscience in our land, if we continue to propose our moral convictions with wisdom, with ardor, with love, with courage, and with personal credibility, we do so not only out of our own national heritage, but drawing deeply on the legacy of Dignitatis humanae. Yes, in the face of aggressive secularism, we have seen a disintegration of the community and social structures that once supported religious faith, which has hindered efforts to spread the faith. Yet, in many ways, these challenges are windows of opportunity in the new evangelization, because people invariably find that the pretensions of the secular order are not able to satisfy the longings of the human heart. Thus, for all of the difficulties the church has faced and is facing, because we offer the world real hope, because the gospel message continues to be the answer to the needs and longings of people today, the church in the United States is still strong. There are many signs of renewal. It is easy to lock doors, as was done with the brick chapel in 1704, but it is far better to push doors open, to allow a place for vibrant religious faith in the public life of a community or nation. Our religious beliefs stand, as they have from the beginning, ready to serve our country in the public square, shedding the light of God's wisdom into the heart of the great American experiment in religious pluralism and liberty, while at the same time contributing to the common good and fostering the natural and spiritual prosperity of our people. Precisely because of religious liberty that is a legacy of Dignitatis humanae and the heritage of our great nation, made up of so many cultural, ethnically, and religiously diverse peoples, that we can say, God bless America.